Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low-oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast. Officially, Michael, welcome to Carnivorist Chats, my friend. This has been a long time coming, and I'm so thankful for having you here. Thank you for taking the time out to join me today.
Well, I'm honored to be joining you, my friend James, my carnivore oxalate buddy.
So good to see you, my
Yeah,
friend. It's so good to see you smiling.
I enjoyed the hell out of interviewing you for my YouTube channel. So thank you for having me on here.
Oh, you're more than welcome, and I'm anxious for folks to hear your story. I know, Michael, that recently, I connected, and we connected both with Scott from Carnivore Cast,
Yeah.
and you shared your incredible journey there. But I'm anxious for you to get the chance to tell your story. And just before we start, I want to make sure that folks know that, as Michael mentioned, he did interview me, and you can find him, and we'll get all his details later, but on his podcast channel, Michael Mathieu Vibrant Health on YouTube. And I'll make sure that I put the link up in my Instagram stories after this, again, for those folks that haven't seen it as well. Make sure you subscribe and like Michael's YouTube channel, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's start from the beginning, Michael. Yeah, I know it's a journey, but we have some time today. I want to make sure folks know and understand about how important certain things were in the development of your health as we go along.
I'm still figuring, trying to figure out, what happened. Did I get a lemon of a gene pool body, or how exactly did that come together? But my diet was not great growing up, and suburbs of New Jersey until I was 8, and my mom was trying to save money, so but it was the classic growing up in the mid 60s and early 70s of Wonder Bread and Parquet margarine, and I can remember as kids we called them sugar sandwiches. We'd take a piece of Wonder Bread, we'd put a Parquet margarine on it, and then we'd cover it with sugar, and we'd roll that up and eat it. So and then all the candy stuff, and and chocolate, and and breakfast was Captain Crunch and Pop Tarts, and lunch was white bread sandwiches with not much meat, and what was that? Kraft American Singles cheese. I don't even know. Is that like real food?
I'm wondering that myself.
Yeah. And then and then my grandma, my mother's mother, my mom, she was kind of like a German baker. So we always had she'd make tarts, she'd make donuts, she made some pretty cool, good eating stuff as well. But just there was that whole, she was even making our bread by hand. This is a woman who had like one of those huge pastry boards. She would make her own strudel dough, the phyllo dough, sorry. She'd make her own phyllo dough for making apple strudel from scratch. Which was a treat, but at the same time, again, more carbs and junk. And anyway, so, and then we moved to Maine when I was 8, and those first few years, we bought an old Maine house, and and the guy who had been there for forever, he had a huge garden plot. So, we thought we were doing really great stuff then. And I'm trying to think of all that we grew, but he already had a raspberry patch. And then they probably were cultivated initially, but, we called them way out in the back. There was blackberries. So there was blackberry jam. And we had a patch of rhubarb on the property. And even though it was so horrible tasting, I don't know why we ate that stuff, but But and and you bring up the oxalates already, and I thought about this since I learned about oxalates. Something never felt quite right growing up when we were told, well, the leaves of the rhubarb are poisonous, but the stalks are magically okay to eat, right? So I don't know how much we actually ate it, but it was there and it happened some, and I think there was probably like strawberry raspberry tarts or I'm sorry, like a strawberry rhubarb tart, maybe pies here and there. Yeah, but then garden wise, I don't know how the rest of the garden really was in Ox. Well, we did grow potatoes, so there's that, and then some of it was low. I mean, lettuces and zucchini and string beans and carrots. I knew we grew beets, but I don't think I liked them, so I don't think I ate them much.
When you were saying, Michael, that coming up, and now that's great because you painted that picture that even through your childhood you were being exposed to sort of some high oxalate stuff. Now that we've learned what we've learned, and it was like I remember you talking about at 23 you got your engineering degree and then ended up in Kodak in New York. And what happened when you moved up there?
Let me fill in a couple more pieces that I
Sure.
think are important to mention before we go there. But yeah, your memory is really good there. Um, so I loved peanut butter. So and my grandma made this wonderful homemade bread. So I'd toast that in the morning and just slather it with peanut butter, and sometimes we even put fluffernutter on top of it for more of the insulin rush, right? And then with lunch there was always like Suzy Q's and Ring Dings and some of that garbage too. Yeah, so just wanted to fill in that part. And health wise, you know, I know there was times I would get sick and get bronchitis kind of stuff, and even through high school, and but I was always underweight, and even in my body, if you look at my knees, I've got really knobby knees, which look very classic. Some people might know of a disease that's most common in growing boys called Osgood-Schlatter's. And I don't know if the medical community gives a reason for it, but when you look at knees like that, and it's the knobbiness is right where the patella ligament attaches on the tibia, which is the lower leg bone. So it was so knobby for me. Kneeling on a wood floor was hard. It was like and I was underweight and showing signs of not enough minerals and probably healthy fats, right? Because we know how important those fat soluble vitamins A, K2, and D are for getting proper bone formation, right? It's classic Weston Price stuff. So, I definitely was showing signs of malnutrition and not enough good nutrition to make healthy, strong bones. So that's kind of my and not terribly sickly, but I'd get the bad cold every year probably, and again, not very strong, not well muscled, and I mean there was even my senior year in high school there was women on the track team who could lift more weights than me, especially with my upper body, and not to make it a gender thing, but it's like I played basketball and sports, but I started having knee trouble actually my senior year in high school. I, I, at the end of basketball season, I was having enough knee pain. I decided not to run track in the spring.
It
So
isn't
anyway, just a little
isn't
setup to we were starting to see signs of there's stuff going on.
For sure. I was going to say, Michael, isn't it interesting now, now that we know what we know, and thanks again to all the wonderful folks out there like Sally who have taught us the way. Looking back, I remember conversing with you on my own journey and how, I was just a peanut butter fiend like you as a
Oh
kid. I
yeah.
mean, I used to get teased as a kid because every day for lunch was peanut butter and jelly,
Oh,
peanut butter and jelly.
oh
I
wow.
didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't deviate from it at all for years and years. In fact, I would have it breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'd have toast with peanut butter, but we say that all to say that it was setting us up for issues later down the line. And I
Yeah.
shudder to think when I see all these folks on Instagram now making reels that are feeding their kids a lot of this high nut butter and vegan stuff.
Yeah.
But take it into now the next stage of your journey as you headed off into university or the working world, wherever you want to start.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what. Well, one last thing I'll note in high school is I also started showing signs of dysbiosis in the gut. I can still remember one of my best buddies, Rob, used to sit behind me in math class, and right after lunch, and I probably had cheese in my sandwiches then, and later discovered dairy didn't work, but I had such foul, bad flatulence after lunch that anytime I let one out, Rob would kick my chair just to tell me, it's like, stop it, you bad man, because I'm not one to smell that. So anyway, they were like rank. So some signs of really messed up microbiome already.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and then that got worse in college, and I mean it was, I could smell up my whole dorm room. I mean I was, and then comes in the weird stuff of, not only, what's the matter with my body that this is happening, it's also was so embarrassing socially, so I'm more layers of like shame on top of all this nonsense, and those, when that shame stuff gets set in at such an early age, it's just huge overlays, just into your life. So the bigger than just physical ramifications, right? There's this whole other emotional piece on top of it. Anyway,
Yeah.
anyway, let's see. So college, yeah, more some of that stuff just continuing and getting worse, and then after college, you said right. I got my degree in electrical engineering, and I got a job at Eastman Kodak in Rochester, New York, and they had a food co-op, and some of the people who are more our age know what those are. I don't know how many of them there are these days, but they were the guys. Those stores were the ones that had all the organic stuff, and before the bigger shopping centers started bringing that in and making it more available to everybody. But anyway, I thought this was the coolest thing. My oldest sister had cooked at a vegetarian restaurant, and so I was enamored with that whole idea for multiple reasons. And so I joined this food co-op, and then I'm like adventurous with eating, so I'm cooking spinach, I'm cooking Swiss chard, um, you know, and this food co-op, they had their nut butters in bulk, so you could bring in your containers, and it was like that was one of my the most favorite thing there for a few years was they had this really dense whole grain bread with nuts in it and cardamom and all this stuff, and I slice a big hunk of that and toast it and just put as much cashew or almond butter on it as I could.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so and then I watched now those 5 years I worked for Kodak full time. I watched myself going from able to go out for a run or play volleyball or play basketball to by the end of that 5 years, I was a gimp. It was and maybe a little shock value. Oh well, no, let me back up one step. So it wasn't even a year in to where my low back went out of me in the first time ever. And I mean, they literally, I was finished playing volleyball. I laid down on the floor to try to stretch my back, and I couldn't stand up. And they had to carry me. Because there's Kodak and they're so big, they had their like on house, like little medical clinic thing that they had. So they actually brought me to the clinic in a stretcher.
Wow.
And I, imagine 23 and your back goes out like that. And it's like, what is wrong with me? It's like, this shouldn't be happening. I should be kicking butt at this age. And, and I watched myself lose my, I think my adrenals really got affected because I know aldosterone is a adrenal hormone that helps with your salt potassium balance and helps you hold on to your water. I lost my water weight. My joints all started making noise and popping. And then, I feared winter because my low back would go out at least one time every winter. And it could be just bending over to tie my shoes and ding, there it goes. And then I'd be laid up for like a week, gimping around. Anyway, so, I just figured, oh, I've got some structural problems. And that led me to discovering body work. And I ended up studying rolfing initially after I left Kodak. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But I watched my whole body just fall apart. And so the thing I was going to say a second ago was there was at least one time when I ejaculated and my low back went out right after. That's how bad my whole energy internal system was, that I was a wreck.
Wow. Michael, had you done any testing at that point on anything to find out what could be the problem? And let me just add the second part of that question is, had you become mostly vegetarian at that point or even vegan? What were you eating in the Kodak days?
I never went full on, but there was definitely a lot of meals where I didn't eat any animal food.
Yeah.
And I was buying these. I thought I was being really cool and hip, and there was these tofu hot dogs that were called not dogs.
I remember those.
Yeah, and I can remember I would put tahini on them because I thought that made a nice flavor.
Oh boy.
So yeah, yep, oh yeah, and yep, and I would buy I'd buy one of those nice like organic cereals, like breakfast cereals, and of course, I'd started figuring out the dairy thing wasn't working. At some point in there, about 25, 26, I stopped all the dairy, and all the acne on my back just disappeared, and the flatulence almost totally disappeared. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm one of those people who has trouble with dairy. And sometime when I first came out to Boulder, Colorado, where I am now, I came out to start the prep training for learning how to do this body work called rolfing. And anyway, I met up, a friend introduced me to this chiropractor who did a lot of nutritional work. So she got me to work with a lab called Great Smokies, which they're no longer around. Their name changed. But anyway, we did a full-on stool test, and my gut was a disaster. I had, Candida was at the top of their scale, high. My good bacteria was in the cellar, low. I had 2 pathogenic amoebas and 2 pathogenic bacteria. And
Michael, I wanted to ask you, and sorry to interrupt you, from listening to the podcast you did with Scott Pryor. Do you recall the names of any of those pathogens that you had, just out of interest? Because I know I had Shigella and Candida, Shigella is a really bad pathogen, and then Candida was really high, like yours.
I'm scouring the brain cells.
No, if it comes to you during our
Yeah,
conversation,
well,
that's fine.
one of the amoebas was Dientamoeba fragilis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay, I think I've heard of that one. But
and I
yeah,
don't remember the other amoeba and the one of the bacteria. Yeah, I'm not pulling it out.
nope,
It's
that's
been
no
too long.
problem.
Yeah, but
But yeah,
it was Candida that was out the roof though for the fungal stuff.
yeah.
And but I was happy when I got the results because it's like, well, God, this explains why my digestion's so messed up. But that's part of the story. But I wondered for years, starting then, it's like, wow, is it the 5 mercury fillings I have in my mouth? I was trying to figure out everything. It's like my mom got a bunch of fillings put in her mouth, in her late teens before she started having kids, and I'm the third of 3. So maybe, I got dosed the highest from her because we know placenta concentrates heavy metals, and it's so you can get born mercury toxic without even just because your mom was. So,
Yeah. Michael,
yeah.
just as an aside, a quick aside, I heard you mention rolfing. Can you explain for those folks that don't know what it is
Oh,
about quickly what it
sure.
is?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
bet. You bet. So that was my first step into doing body work. And Rolfing, there was a woman named Ida Rolf, and that's where the name comes from. Um, Now we're the organization is calling it the Rolf Institute of Structural Integration. So what Ida figured out way back in the day was, and this was a special woman because she got her PhD in biochemistry back in the, I forget, it was the teens or the 20s, 1900s. So way ahead of her time, getting a PhD for a woman back then, and just really smart, able to think outside the box, and and if my understanding is right, she started learning. She learned yoga, she learned Tai Chi, she was hanging out with osteopaths back in the day, who were doing really cool stuff back then. Because osteopathic work, a lot of people don't know, started off as hands-on manipulative work on the human body. They do joint adjustments and all kinds of cool stuff. Anyway, so Ida kind of, got introduced to all these things, and she started seeing, she put people in yoga positions and then put her hands on their tissues and really sunk into what we call the myofascias, or the fascias, the wrappings, the fibrous wrappings around the muscle tissue, which is kind of what holds our shape and holds things together. That if you apply pressure at the right depth and speed, you can actually change people's body structure and how that body lines up in gravity. So, so you're looking for people, their ankles, hips, pelvis, shoulder girdle, ears, to be more in a straight line when people are standing vertically. And
It's
and
it
the
sounds quite painful, is it?
It was back in the day, but the way they're teaching it now, it's much more refined,
Mhm.
and they're figuring out they don't have to dig their elbow too deeply into you. So I kind of caught it midline where there was times we were grunting and groaning, but boy, if you go through that and it fixes your low back, then that's a really great thing.
Yeah.
And then yeah, so and then my work progressed over time when I got introduced to, especially the osteopathic work of this one French guy named Jean-Pierre Barral, who started figuring out you could work with organs and their support fascias that hold them in place. So, liver's a really heavy organ and it's right up against the diaphragm, and there's ligaments that hold it into the diaphragm. But anyway, I think I'm getting ahead of myself again. But
Oh,
but
interesting stuff.
yeah, it's really cool stuff. And what's cool about since we're talking about it, I might as well finish it up. But with when I learned the osteopathic, when I started learning how to work on organs, which we often call visceral manipulation, that just changed everything. Because sometimes, you wipe out, you slip on the ice and fall hard on your butt, or you're wipe out skiing, or you get in a car accident, and it's those heavy organs, the heavy dense organs, like a liver, like a kidney, like a spleen, like your brain. you know when you start talking about, and this is where the engineering part comes in, if you're like moving really fast in a car, and then the car runs into something, another car or whatever, and stops really quickly, there's a big deceleration. Those heavy organs, it's pure physics here. Those heavy organs, they want to keep going the same direction and speed they were going.
Hmm.
And now they're getting stopped. So everything that's attached to them can get wrenched. So
You know,
this is, and organs, and it's pretty simple when you start thinking it through. Highest priority in the body is organs. Your heart, your kidneys, your liver. If they're under strain, and the body can do some kind of, like, oh, maybe the liver's under strain because you wrapped around your seatbelt when you got rear-ended, and now all those ligaments around the liver are really tight. But if the body goes into a right side bend and that takes strain off the liver is going to be under less stress, and the body will sacrifice, your low back, your thoracic spine, and all the muscles that do that work, because that makes the liver happier. So, so that's why when we do this adjustments on organs, we can get such profound changes, because the body's made a purposeful decision to protect an organ, or protect, say, maybe it's an artery in your neck. You got whiplashed and uh, vertebral artery or carotid artery is under strain. It can't stretch like it used to. So, people who do yoga will, a lot of people have this experience of like, God, I can stretch my neck to the right really well, but when I go to the left, it won't go that way. And I've been doing I've been doing yoga for 10 years and really hitting it hard. And I can't get my neck to release. And then they'll come to somebody who does this visceral work, and it was like, oh, you have all the strain in your carotid artery. And you can very gently get that to release and get stretchy again, like a bungee cord, like it should be. Or the other thing is it can get trapped in its neighboring tissues. So we want it to glide as well through the neighborhood. And if you can do that, sometimes it's very specific, very gentle work. And then something that's been haunting somebody for 10 years is gone in just a few minutes. If you can get really specific.
It's really interesting. Thanks, Michael. I wanted to ask that at this junction, when I heard this number, it astounded me, because folks need to understand, I thought I looked like an emaciated skeleton when I got to my lowest number, which was around 127 pounds. But I understand you got down to like 120 at your lightest, Michael?
Yeah, I did.
Oh my goodness.
And how tall are you? I don't know if I know how tall you are.
I'm 6'2", but I know it's the, I really was a wisp in the wind, but
yeah.
So
I was about 5'11" then, a little bit less than 5'11".
Wow.
So that was, you were probably thinner than me, I think, too.
Oh, yeah. I just remember being so self-conscious and so scared. I mean, when did you start adding? I know this was around the time you maybe started adding meat back in again and got off dairy and gluten. Is that correct?
What when I was in Rochester, I didn't go fully no meat, but after, when I left, and my health kind of really fell apart. I did my Rolfing training, and then I moved back to Maine to hang out with my parents for a while. I found I was really in a bad place emotionally, physically, everything. And I ended up finding out about this place in Massachusetts called Kripalu. And it's a spiritual retreat center. It used to be a Jesuit monastery. And anyway, it got bought out by a spiritual group, and, and they're teaching yoga and massage and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, they had a residential program, and, and the whole place is vegetarian. So then I did fully go vegetarian. And then, of course, I gravitated towards this little group they were all into sprouting and live foods. So we were making this Ann Wigmore's energy soup, and we were sprouting sunflowers and buckwheats, and, and eating the sprouts. Anyway, that was when my weight got the lowest. Yeah. Vegetarian, and then going for all these raw vegetable foods. Yeah.
I can totally empathize with you there, sir. They did nothing but drop my weight and make me feel lousy. So what was next after this? Well, what happened next?
I think it's worth saying one thing that, in looking back on it retrospectively, it's like there's all this focus on like detox. And this woman, Erin Wigmore, was telling people to do, what do you call it? Like wheatgrass implantations, where you put wheatgrass up your butt. And, and there's just like, oh, well, I'm feeling bad now because I'm detoxing. That was the myth. And it's just like, if I can just get to the other side of this detox and clear enough of all these toxins that are in my body, then I'm going to finally heal with all these plant foods. And that never happened. I just got worse.
It sure did not. And I've talked about it as well. Everywhere in that vegetarian and vegan community is, when you're feeling terrible, it's because you're detoxing. So you've got to go harder. You've got to double down. That just means you've got more stuff to clear. Go on a full moon protocol. You need a coffee enema. You need Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Wow. So what happened next, Mike?
Well, then I moved to Colorado. I moved to Fort Collins first, and at that time there was only two Rolfers, and so whereas in Boulder, I really liked Boulder, but there was like over 70 or something here, so it was ridiculous to start off as a new person. Anyway, so I moved to Fort Collins, and they had a food co-op, of course, too. And anyway, at some point, I did a consultation with the nutritionist, and she's like, "Mike, I'm sorry, you got to eat some meat." And I started eating meat, and I literally, oh well, this is how bad it got. I always had kind of a washboard belly because I was so thin, and I did enough hiking and biking and stuff, to keep some tone in my muscles. When I really went to that live food thing, the washboard disappeared. I had just a flat belly, and that was scary. That was scary to see that. So anyway, I started eating meat, and literally within a month, I gained 10 pounds. Boom.
Wow.
And that was my answer right there. It was like, not to go carnivore, but at least you have to eat meat.
Yeah.
But then, the thing along the way is, though, because, I didn't say this, back when I did that stool test, the chiropractor I worked with, she says, I think you have gluten problems and I think you have dairy problems. So I was like, okay, we'll stay off of those. And then, so then where does that bring you, of course? Well, then you go to quinoa and buckwheat and amaranth, and there we go. In retrospect, it's like, oh great, I dropped eating a high oxalate, wheat, but I went even higher with quinoa and buckwheat, and so so then it was limping along. The meat's back in, but then we're still doing the grain thing, so or seeds, whatever you want to call it, quinoa and buckwheat. But anyway, those are in, and I still was a fiend for nuts. So, I would grind up cashews in my little coffee grinder, mix in a little bit of water or oil, and I was putting that on things. So, yeah,
Were,
yeah.
were you, were you on the nut milks at this time too, Michael?
Rice milk, soy milk, nut milk. Yeah, I tried making nut milk my own for a while. I
Me
found
too.
this recipe book for how to make nut cheeses.
Oh,
Yeah, so yeah, and I didn't say with that whole sprouting thing, I would like soak and sprout nuts and seeds, and then I'd put them in my smoothies. Sometimes I made like a paste out of it and I put it in my dehydrator, and it was great stuff to bring camping. It was like, sometimes I fermented, sometimes not.
so at this point you had added the meat back in, gained 10 pounds. I think if I recall, and you'll obviously correct me, was it at this time that you felt strong enough to start exercising again, and then that led to the infamous bike ride?
Oh, you're going way, way,
Oh,
way ahead.
okay, so we
Yeah.
still got a bit to go. Okay,
Oh,
okay,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm talking more like late 20s
okay.
into early 30s there. So, but then there was a long time where it was kind of just limping along. And, I can't tell you how many different practitioners I went to see with, acupuncture, naturopathic doctors, trying different diets. I got into Ayurveda. At one point, tried macrobiotics, and this is over a bunch of time, and um, yeah, and I think kept hitting nuts heavy all along the way, and I did get my weight up to probably like 140, 145 or so, but I was just struggling and just couldn't find answers, and um, at one point I ended up. At one point, my ex-wife and I went to Mexico. I picked up a bug. I was, I had diarrhea for 8 months, and hit it 3 times with antibiotics. So more distress to my poor gut. And at the end, and then I also got my mercury fillings out because I got convinced they had to come out, and that still makes sense to me. But I don't know if I went with the best dentist when I did that because he ended up having to retire. I think he got mercury poisoned in his own practice because he was such a wreck.
Wow.
He wasn't using the full-on protocols, because this was back 20 years ago. And anyway, I don't know if I had a nose, an oxygen nose source in my mouth. He had the reverse, vacuum air, and he had the rubber dam, but it's the vapors that's the worst. So anyway, sometime after that, those two things, and I don't know if it's both of them together or one of them, but all of a sudden I started reacting to all the sulfur foods, the foods high in sulfur, and so all the brassicas. And I can still remember the morning it hit. I'd been eating a lot of eggs for breakfast for a few months. And this one morning I was eating my eggs. I got like really brain fogged. And then I had to run to the toilet with diarrhea. And then ever since then, eggs, all the brassicas, the cabbage family, onions. If I eat some of those, I have diarrhea really quick. I haven't dared try in the last 4 or 5 years, but anyway, the last time I tried, it didn't go well still.
Yeah.
So, and that whole experience then got me into chelating for mercury poisoning, because the sense was maybe I got re-exposure with getting my fillings out, and maybe not the best way. And then things got really bad. I mean, health got even worse. I had to keep paring off down my diet. And then at one point I got off all the grains, and, still having trouble with diarrhea. And that got me into doing colon irrigation. And, I was so desperate to just try anything, and nothing was working. And then, I found out about chelation and started doing some work to get mercury out with DMSA and ALA. And then at some point I just decided, you know what? Let's just see what happens if I eat nothing but meat and winter squash. And then like 3 days later, I had a normal bowel movement. And then I realized, what I already said is that then I realized, oh my God, my food sensitivities have just gotten way worse.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure that out. So then, and what else is interesting retrospectively is I put myself on a low-oxalate diet without realizing it, because then I proceeded to go through a couple of years of hell. And I didn't know what was going on. I was almost suicidal. And now to look back, it's like, oh my God, I think I was really heavily oxalate dumping and I didn't know it. I literally got down to, for about 10 years, all the winter squashes worked fine, all the meats, and zucchini was okay, and coconut oil and olive oil, and eventually figured out that avocados were okay. And that was almost my entire diet for 10 years.
And for those folks that are listening and have either been mercury toxic or have tried to chelate it, it is not an easy job by the body to get rid of mercury out. But the protocol by Andy Cutler, it's a big one. And Michael referenced DMSA and ALA. ALA is alpha lipoic acid, and it is a very tough thing to put the body through to try and chelate mercury, isn't it, Michael? I mean, how long did you do that for?
Andy always recommended people did, rounds of 3 days chelating, 4 days off. Mm-hmm. And probably for 2 years, I pretty much hit it every weekend because I was so determined to get better.
Yeah.
And I got to a place where I was more stable. But again, looking back on it, and knowing about oxalates now, I also got off oxalates. So it's like, what was what, or is it both, or I don't know. And for some people, that chelating with DMSA and ALA, it for some people it works awesome, and other people not so well. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down not for now, but yeah.
Sure.
So I did finally get kind of a little more stable, although still kind of a gimp, and still a lot of electrolyte problems, and still not able to put on much mass.
It's hard to believe because like myself, yours is even more incredible. We kept getting to these stages. Well, it can't get worse. This possibly can't get
Oh
worse,
yeah, yeah.
and it did.
Oh, look at
I
that, it's worse.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Here we go. But I hate to ask what was next. What was next on your journey? Where did you what did you find? I mean, it must have been a little glimmer of hope for you to get some strength back soon.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of gimped along, but then it was obvious, it was obvious I had SIBO or something, just still dysbiosis. I think I got into coffee enemas for a while. I don't know if that really helped all that much. And then at some point, I was talking with a colleague. At that point, I'm out here. I'm talking to a colleague who's back in Maine, and she is telling me how, because Lyme is so rampant in New England, and she was a body worker in Maine, and she ran across this guy who was doing colloidal silver injections into people and like doing IV colloidal silver to wipe out Lyme. And I was like, well, maybe I have Lyme. So I flew back to Maine to see this guy, and I got an IV of colloidal silver. Well, actually, no, before I actually went to see him in person, he sent me some colloidal silver I could drink. And oh my God, that first weekend I drank it, it was like heaven opened, and I felt like a normal human being for like a bit. And I mean, so that just confirmed with me I had major dysbiosis and, infection in my gut. And, I mean, it was crazy because I remember that weekend because, normally I had to like plan my exercise. Like, on a weekend I could either dance or I could ride my mountain bike for a couple hours, and that was it. And I remember that weekend. I danced in the morning. I went out and met a buddy. We went for a long bike ride, and I still felt great. And then I exercised at home, did my push-ups and sit-ups and lifted weights. I was like, oh my God, this is going to heal me. Oh, I'm almost there. It's like, holy shit, I just got to clean these parasites out and everything's going to be fine. And then, unfortunately, over time, that gradually diminished. So, whether I just have really smart pathogens that can keep adapting. But whatever. Anyway, it wasn't the answer, but boy, I got a glimmer of how bad my poor gut was with out of control, unbalanced microbiome.
Yeah.
So
When they take over, the pathogenic take over, it is super tough. If our friend Emma, GAPS coach Emma was here, she would talk about how important the gut healing is, and
yeah,
I firmly agree. I hate to keep saying this, but what happened next?
yeah. Well, then the story really turns upside down.
Oh boy.
So it was, I was getting along enough to get out and do some exercise, and I just love mountain biking, and and where I am in Colorado, there's some sweet
Oh
places.
yeah.
And so it's the end of August, we're running out of, the best weather, especially in the evening, and lights starting to get darker. And so it's like, okay, I can still go out after work and put my bike on my car, went out and worked that day, and then right to this trail in Lyons, Colorado. And anyway, so it was one of those perfect nights where I call it body neutral, where it's not hot, so you're sweating to death. It's just that right temperature where it just feels great. And there's a backstory I think I'm going to leave out for now, but I I I pulled off the trail. I'll just leave it like this because of some other stuff that was up in my life. I pulled off the trail and I was going to do a little personal ceremony and around some things that I was exploring and trying to figure out. And I lost track of time, and emotions are coming up already. Um,
Take your time, brother.
yep. So I was so involved in what I was doing, I lost track of the dark. And then when I finally like really looked, it was like, oh shit, I got to get off the trail. And I wasn't too far away from my car, but still had to go a ways. And I even missed the little voice that said, you know, you might think about walking your bike. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. It's not, there's nothing that technical in the trail right now. Well, I ended up hitting a ledge of rock that I missed. And it just was just high enough so the bike stopped. And I wasn't even going that fast. But, all the weight going forward causes you to just grab on to the brakes. And the whole bike rotated over the front tire. And I had a helmet on, but I came straight down on solid rock. And my neck went into extreme flexion as I hit and then rolled. And I still, this is the whole, when people tell stories like that where everything went slow motion, it's like I can still remember hearing the as five vertebrae broke into little bits. C4 and C5 vertebral bodies, which are kind of the hockey puck part of the vertebrae. Those things of C4 and C5 smashed into bits, and then the spinal cord was almost completely severed at C4-5. And I probably don't need to get into all the story around that whole thing, but leave it to say I was laying on my back on the trail. It was completely dark at that point, and it was probably around midnight or so when search and rescue came and got me off the trail.
Oh,
And I
geez.
was literally, I think that's my last memory of. I thought I heard some sounds, and I was, and when I heard those sounds of what I think was the rescue people coming, it was um, I was quite aware that I was having to. At first, it was like I was so deep in shock, and I still could move my head, and I was stupidly moving it. I was so deep in shock that I thought I hit like the funny bone that put your whole body to sleep. And if I just waited for a half hour, an hour, I'd be able to walk off the trail. But anyway, so that was like the last memory of hearing those guys come. But I was having to think to breathe, and I was in that realization of like, oh wow, this is how I'm gonna go. I'm 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 like moments from dying because I'm having to work to breathe. And anyway, search and rescue guys got me to the hospital, and they had to do major neck surgery, um, and then I was at a hospital in Longmont for like 45 days. We finally figured out. My parents and family worked so hard. My sister and my brother-in-law and my partner, Beth at the time, worked so hard at getting me into this rehab hospital, Craig Hospital, which is in Denver. And it's considered one of the premier hospitals for rehabilitating spinal cord injury. And so they got me in there. The day I got in there was the first time I had pain in my neck, and they did obligatory imagery and found out that my hardware was failing, and my neck was starting to move to one side. And so I immediately had to go in and have a second surgery.
Wow.
And then 3 months of rehab, which should have been like hardcore rehab, but I was recovering. Most people get in there and then it's 3 months of rehab and you're doing all this great stuff with all these therapists. I'm like, at the beginning, I'm recovering from second neck surgery. So, and then my blood pressure was so horrible, even from the beginning. It's worth mentioning this, I think. Uh, the first meal that I had after the neck surgery, so I'm quadriplegic at that point, and but we didn't understand the extent of my blood pressure, my um, hypotension, not hypertension, so very low blood pressure. I ate a meal. It was the first meal I ate after, just whatever they were pumping in my veins, and I code blued. I passed out because anytime food gets into my gut, it's just like my blood pressure just collapses. And then it became just keeping Michael alive and keeping his blood pressure up. So I don't know where I wanted to go with that all, but anyway, that's been a big issue ever since then. Um, and then it's probably worth mentioning, you're limited when so they did a tracheostomy and put me on a feeding tube, and then I was ventilated, um, and so I couldn't eat through my mouth then, and with the vent, and anyway, so when you get put on a feeding tube, you have two choices: you get grain-based food or you get dairy-based food. So we chose grain-based, and this stomach, my intestines hadn't seen grain in 10 years at that point.
Oh, Michael.
So it was just, I think that just like destroyed me. It's amazing. I still sometimes think about it. It's like, God, how did I survive through that? It's
You
really incredible.
you are, and we'll get to more at the end, sir,
Yeah.
but you are a miracle,
Yeah.
Michael, from what you have overcome in your life to where even just the part of the story we're at now. And there's more miraculous things we're going to talk about, but you're just incredible. And folks need to know that. They need to know with everything you've been through to maintain the attitude that you have, maintain the positivity, and be able to share your story. I count you as a dear friend,
Yeah.
and thank you for sharing
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Um,
So I think one of the things I want to say that since I've learned about oxalates the last 3.5 years, um, it's become more and more clear to me when I think through the story of my health journey. You know, some practitioner I worked with decided he wanted to see DEXA scans. And, so here I am at 38. I get a DEXA scan and it shows I have osteopenia in my hip and I have osteoporosis in my lumbar spine. At 38 for a man, that should not even be anywhere remotely in the picture. And then it was 10 years after that that I crashed, and my, you know, granted, from an engineer's perspective, coming straight down on your head on rock, even with a helmet, and all my body weight above me, yeah, you could make an argument for that's going to break some neck vertebra. But that said, I could also make an argument if I had really super healthy bones, I would have like tweaked my neck really bad. But I don't think, or, even if I did have some fractures, I wouldn't have had two vertebral bodies just break into pieces. So, you know, in putting information out about oxalates on my YouTube channel and also on Instagram, I think it's one of the reasons I'm so damn passionate about it. When, just like you were saying at the beginning of this, when we see people feeding their kids, crackers made out of almonds and spinach, it just please do not do what I did. You know, don't get in a mild bike accident and become quadriplegic.
Michael, I wonder if at this juncture, we have about 40 odd minutes left, and I want to get to the stage where we might have to hop back a bit, but then come back to where you found out about Sally and connected with her because
Yeah.
it's such an important part. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
So, after my injury and trying to put my life together, I'm trying to remember a few things. My body health, and you could say, wow, yeah, you lost some of your brain control of things. That could be a good reason why you had so much health trouble after that, or that it got so much worse. But yeah, and Beth, when you end up with an injury like this that changes your life so drastically, black humor is just part of the course, because you got to make fun of what the hell's going on, because everything's upside down. And but we would joke and say things like, gosh, if I only had to deal with quadriplegia, life would be so much better. That's how bad the chronic health stuff became, where I was like in pain and misery and not sleeping. And, it was just absolutely. So I don't know, it was how much of what, I got exposed to in the hospital with all the chemicals and drugs and, or how much of it is that, the stuff because my diet at that point had been almost low oxalate for 10 years. But then, of course, I was like, well, I'm going to heal myself. So let's juice with, well, I was smart enough. I used romaine lettuce, but I would juice a whole head of romaine lettuce, an inch chunk of ginger, and a half a bunch of parsley because I thought, got to get those deep, dark greens in there. And then, if you know much about oxalates, if your health is really, if you've had a big trauma or had other, deleterious things happen, you can go from absorbing a small amount of oxalates to a lot. I've heard Sally say it can be like you can absorb as much as like 60% instead of a paltry 4 or 5. So I have a feeling that's what happened to me. So even though I wasn't eating crazy high oxalate, I think I was absorbing a ton, and there might be some other reasons, but anyway, so gimping along, trying to figure things out, and knowing my gut dysbiosis was horrible. I stumbled upon a practitioner who was proposing a SIBO diet where you basically go carnivore for a while and then you just hit it with all the herbs you can to kill everything. And I was like, well, I haven't tried carnivore. I've tried about everything else, so let's try that. And sometime when I was pondering whether to do it or not, I think YouTube, the YouTube algorithm, was threw a video at me that probably was Sally, and I was like, fuck oxalates. I don't need to hear about one more thing that I can do when I'm doing all these other things. So I like totally shelved that. But then in August of 19, I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's see what happens. I was terrified I was going to lose weight because my history was if I didn't eat enough carbs, which was winter squash, then I lost weight. So, I was eating like probably, like 1.5 acorn squashes a day plus meat and lots of coconut oil or olive oil or whatever and zucchini. Anyway, so I go full on carnivore and it's like, I'm not losing weight. That's interesting. And then probably, a few weeks later, YouTube does it again, throws another Sally Norton video at me. And then I'm like, well, okay, I'll listen to this because I'm already low oxalate. So let's find out what this is all about. And then in watching that video, I was like, oh my God. Because I never could figure out that early 20s thing. Now it's easy to talk about, and knowing that, I joined the food co-op in Rochester, New York, and went high oxalate without realizing it. It was like, that explains why my health went to shit. Because I thought maybe I got exposed to some weird chemicals at Kodak, because you walk around and there's pipes over your head and shit's dripping and, all this stuff. Anyway, so, there was a part of Rochester that was known to be really toxic and people were getting sick, but they were like really close to where Kodak was. Anyway, I never could make sense of why my health went to shit then. And then when I watched that first Sally video, I was like, oh, I did it to myself. I didn't get toxified from something around me in the environment. I did it to myself. And that was hard. And then I went through a period. I don't know if you've gone through anything like this, but I probably went through about 6 months where I felt totally betrayed by the plants.
I can totally
Like it
empathize
was
with you,
their
Michael.
fault that I chose to eat them.
Yep.
Oh
Yep.
my God, I felt so betrayed. And then I finally realized, no, it was the diet dictocrats that I was betrayed by, not the plants.
Well, Michael, I
Yeah.
just want to pause there because this is such an important point, and it's raised its head even for me recently. Probably heard my conversation with Jane Buxton, who's author of The Great Plant-Based Con. And she talked so eloquently, and her book is so fantastic if folks haven't got it, and talks about why people, meaning governments, dietary agencies, are pushing the plant-based agenda. And it really kicked off around that time, that 2012, 14 onwards when I became vegan. But even today, this just shows you, Michael, even today on Instagram, where I'm clearly carnivore and I'm clearly putting out a message that's anti-vegan. I'm not saying don't remove all vegetables and you can't eat vegetables, but I'm clearly anti all vegetable diets. It's still, Instagram is referring me vegan, vegan, vegan. Every time I go to watch a reel, everything is coming up plant-based. It's almost like it's unavoidable. So, when you talk about blaming ourselves, I had a few months where I was in a really dark spot going, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
What was I thinking? So you linked up with Sally, and then eventually what happened?
Um, well, uh, I went, so I went carnivore, and then that was in August. And then I probably learned about Sally in September. I got an appointment with Sally in November of 19. And, and she gave me some guidance on, the things she recommends around electrolytes and, B vitamins and basically telling me too that since I was so sick and had been for so long, um, she she really, she started talking about years of how long it was going to take probably for me to start feeling better. And I didn't want to hear that at first. I was like on the 6-month plan. But anyway, so I'm trying to remember if at that point I need to go back and look at my pictures. But I started seeing. I don't know how much I saw in the, and initially even going carnivore, you hear so many people. It's like, oh my god, after 2 weeks or a month, oh, I felt so much better. And I was kind of like, no, that's not what's happening for me. I'm just kind of maintaining. Although the one really positive thing that happened is I have a special bike that I ride, and we put electrodes on my quads, hamstrings, and glutes, and the bike computer basically acts like the brain, and it will directly stim the muscles in the right sequence at the right amplitude. And so I'm doing, my legs are actually doing all the work. It's not the bike moving my legs, it's me moving the bike. And and I've been riding the bike at that point for like 8 years. I did measurements at the beginning and after 4 months, and I gained almost an inch and a half of circumference around my thighs in
Wow.
4 months just from eating meat. So that's a huge, huge testimony
Yes.
to it's like here I am a quad, and it's like, holy smokes, look at that, my legs are getting bigger. This is awesome. So then I got introduced to, I want to mention this quick because people need to know about this. There's a biohack, if people haven't heard of it, called blood flow resistance training. And basically, you put some kind of straps around your upper thighs or upper arms. And then you do resistance exercise of whatever type. You can run, you can swim, you can bike, you can do weights in 2 months. And so I have this special system made by a company called Katsu. And so the straps get inflated by this little tiny compressor. And so it pumps them up. So I started using them on my bike. And in 2 months, I gained almost another inch and a half of circumference around my thighs. And I was using the cuffs when I got stretched in the morning because it has a mode where it just pumps up, deflates like every 30 seconds. And so passive stretching, not even active. In 2 months, that same 2 months, I gained a half inch around bicep, tricep, which is huge because
Huge.
I can barely use my arms.
Unbelievable.
So
Unbelievable.
anyway, people need to check out blood flow restriction training. It's an amazing thing. Everybody
For
needs to know about it.
For sure. I'm going
That's
to
my
check it out. I
that,
hadn't heard of it.
that's my commercial for that. But
And
yeah,
what an incredible
so
commercial.
well, yeah, because when I learned about it, it was Dr. Mercola getting interviewed with Paul Saladino, and in the middle of hearing Mercola, I'm getting so emotional about this too. If you don't know anybody with spinal cord injury, whether they're especially quads, but also, um, you know, people with who have full arms, but spinal cord injured. Why am I not thinking of? Anyway, paraplegic. Anyway, osteoporosis is the bane of our existence. Our whole skeletal system can collapse because it's not getting weighted enough. So anyway, Mercola just would not shut up. He just got because he had just discovered it, and then he lost both of his parents. They when they passed on, he said they both had ridiculous sarcopenia because they weren't getting up enough and they weren't keeping their muscle mass up. So I knew this was where I'm headed, even with my bike, and so when I learned about the BFR stuff, it was like I think I started crying because I knew the potential um, for this simple technology to probably keep me alive longer.
God bless you, Michael. It's incredible. I am in awe of you, sir. I am. One of the things that a lot of folks, and let me just talk for a minute while you can
Yep.
get yourself together, is that folks have this question, especially those like you and I that have realized that, oh my goodness, we have been duped by our dietary choices, eaten a ton of oxalate foods, start lowering them, going on the carnivore diet, only to feel worse when the dumping begins and question a lot of the symptoms. You have some incredible things that have happened to you with oxalate dumping. I mean, talk about the photos, the swellings. What happened to
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. So I think it was probably in that early winter of 20. Um, yep. Where my left foot, I think I heard it in the middle of the night. It's like my legs spasm in the middle of the night. But I was hearing this like gunshot popping of what I was guessing was my ankle, and then I woke up in the morning. My left foot was bright red, and the ankle was swollen, and the whole foot was swollen, and I think I probably took a picture and sent it to Sally, and because I was working at it with her at that point, and she was like, "Oh yeah, that's the kind of stuff that happens." And so whenever my leg would spasm on its own, the ankle would pop, and I never heard that in 9 years or 8 years or whatever it was. So anyway, so then it was the right one was mildly inflamed, but the left one was crazy. And then after 2 weeks, it's gone, just totally gone. And then 2 months later, my left hand just totally ballooned up to almost twice its size. And you could say, oh well, did you like run your wheelchair into a wall and crunch your foot, but it's like, no, that didn't happen. And with my left hand, I basically do nothing. I use it on the joystick of my wheelchair, and it just ballooned up all on its own. And after 2 weeks, it disappeared, went back to normal. And then weird rashes, crystals coming out of my skin, especially the neck. There's I know other people experience this too with their dumping, but especially my left side.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all when I get crystals out of my skin, it's almost left side. Um,
Wow.
and and riding the bike. At first, Sally thought it might be some weird. I get this brown. I have a indwelling catheter, and so I have a pee bag at my feet. So I get to see my urine more than most people. And it wasn't uncommon. I would get brown urine after riding my bike. And Sally got really worried at first that it might be like just my cells just like losing their potassium and and going into cell failure and death. And but I think what I started noticing was that initially there'd be a little bit of blood would come out because I'd see it in the tubing that goes to the bag, the drainage bag, and because it's clear tubing anyway, and then it would go brown. So I don't know if I know the physiology enough to stand confidently here, but I think what was happening is I think the exercising was causing so much oxalate dumping that it was ravishing my kidneys, and my kidneys were bleeding. And I think the blood might have gotten oxidized, and some of it would be red, but then I think it started coming out brown. Um, and so I have a bag of brown urine,
My
which
goodness.
yeah. And so there's that, and then terrible itching where I felt like I wanted to like rip my scalp and face off at times, and so really classic symptoms that way. And then mood changes, and sometimes, I'd go from 0 to 60 to being like, oh, I'm having an okay day. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm in high anxiety and I can't be rational and I'm losing my shit and then whoosh, 4 or 5 hours, it would just like go away.
Yeah, it's incredible that happens to so many folks where they get their severe anxiety symptoms just kick back in, and then they disappear a couple of hours later. But I find with me is I start to get a migraine a couple of days before the beginning of a dump, and then a lower back pain for me, usually
Yeah,
around the kidney area. It
it'll come
really
back.
kicks up. It's terrible. And then I tend to I was dumping through my kidneys quite a bit, but now it's mostly through my digestive
Yeah,
tract. So I always know I can always time it. It's like clockwork where I get a headache, low back pain, and then my IBS symptoms come back full
yeah,
bore the next day for the next 3 days, and then they go away. It's
yeah,
just this little crazy thing with oxalates that we've learned from Sally.
yeah.
Um, Talk to us a little bit, Michael. You're so inspiring, and folks are sending some messages across. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but Mary said to you, Michael, your story is so interesting, inspiring. I'm a retired physical rehab registered nurse, and I'm thinking about how your knowledge could be so beneficial to others. At this juncture, I think it's a great time, Michael, to talk about some wins so people understand these wins since you've gone low
Yeah.
oxalate. I mean, so inspiring. Tell us about them.
Yeah. So summer of 21. Yeah. Yeah. So sometime in the summer of 21. It's too bad we don't have these pictures handy. You could flash them up on this. It could, anyway, maybe, I don't know if you want to edit, but if you want, just let me know if you want some pictures that you want us to plug in, but whatever.
What I do, I'm
So
sorry to interrupt you, Michael. I think you have those photos on a reel in Instagram, do you not? Or somewhere on Instagram on your
I
page?
have a few, but I was planning on just putting them out every once in a while. And
Cool, cool.
so,
I'll direct folks to there, but please continue. Sorry
yeah,
to interrupt.
yeah, no worries. So I had a bunch of weird sediment come out that I don't think is oxalate at all because it was powdery the way it came out. And anyway, it was right around that time in June of 21, and um, and I have an abdominal binder. Some people would probably call like a girdle, but it's cotton, stretchy cotton, but it's got kind of like little ribs in it. And so, I was getting my caregiver was helping me get my shirt on, and so it was in between, and I had my hand down there, and I was just rubbing it back and forth on my belly on top of the binder, and my brain was like, hold on here, folks. It's like, are we feeling texture through a place that only had bzzz going on all the time? And I was so freaked out I was going to jinx it that I checked it every time I could and didn't tell anybody for 2 months that in an area about the size of a quarter, maybe, right at the base of my wrist, well, base of my thumb, the thumb part of the wrist, or side of the wrist, if you will, that I was like, wait, I think I'm feeling not quite normal, but not the busy, busy, fuzzy, like when your arms fall asleep and wake up and they're not fully back yet. There's that electric-y, static-y feeling that you get in your nervous system. So that's what normally was there. And what I started feeling was a little closer to what I would say is it wasn't full on normal sensation, but it was pleasant instead of being annoying, because the brain, when you're dealing with this crazy, I don't know, people, you wouldn't know unless you know someone who's a quad, it's not quiet in the nervous system. I mean, it feels like there's bolts of electricity going down my leg and exploding in my foot and all kinds of weird, crazy stuff. People will be flossing me and it'll like explode down my arm or something. Anyway, so it's like, wow, this sensation kind of feels like pleasant. It's like, what a concept, because it's like from my upper chest up is the only place where I have normal sensation, and partway down my upper arm. So I was like, okay. And then finally I started like, hey, I think I'm showing some signs of healing in my nerves that go to my arms. And it's like, wow, wow, that's really awesome. And then right about the time I started telling people, I was in my house, and I went to say something to one of my caregivers, and it literally, without me trying, it came out about 5 times louder than I was expecting. So much that it was like, it startled me. It's like, holy smokes. It's like, where? And then I started checking in with Beth over the next few days, and she's like, Michael, you are talking so much louder. Because my partner's a therapist, and she works downstairs, and I'm often in my bedroom on my iPad, and she's like, I never used to hear you, and she said, now I'm hearing you because you're talking so much louder. And then I was also out right when that happened. I have this one supplement that's a gel cap, and I chew down on it to pop out the biotin from inside, and then I spit out the capsule because it's got white dye, and it's like, I'm not gonna eat this. So anyway, I was outside with it, and normally when I go to spit, it feels like I've got all this pressure, and I'm going to get a good spit, and then poof, and it goes like 2 inches and falls in my lap.
Oh no.
And I was outside, and I spit this thing out. It went 6 feet, and
Whoa.
I was like, oh, that and the loudness of my talking, my diaphragm is working better. It's like, oh, and now that I'm seeing that, it's like, oh, I think I can trust the sensation improvement in my wrist. You it's real because I'm seeing other things of nervous system improvement. So, we're not talking about stuff that's going to make me walk, but, anything you can gain when you're quad is just a really good thing. And
For sure.
and then I also started noticing, especially this past summer of 22, a little bit in 21, but in 22, even more so, where I started feeling like, oh, wow. I had a buddy from college visiting, and we were having a conversation outside, and it just was like, I feel like my old self more. I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm having fun using my brain and talking, and I think we were like playing around and making some poetry together or something. But it was a real fun mental thing talking with him and feeling stimulated and being excited and enjoying being outside. And because when you have this kind of injury, the emotional hit you take can be so much that everything's flat. you know your emotional state can be flat. It can be so hard. And I could go in and out of that depending on the day, but it was just feeling last summer like it was just more consistently. My mood was better. My looking forward to my life was better. And yeah, so um, a big change in mood. And then I think it was probably back in August maybe of 22. I had some blood work done, and it was really showing clear signs that I needed to drop how much desiccated thyroid I was taking. So that one felt, all the objective things, I
Mhm.
don't diminish them in any way, but having an objective, measurement, especially for my engineering brain, it was like, hey, look at that. My thyroid's getting better. It's like, this is a really good thing. So, um, yeah. Anyway.
Super, super, super stuff, Michael. My low-ox journey says, love hearing the wins. Thank you for sharing. And yes, we agree. Michael, as I sort of and start to wind down over the next 10 minutes, I want to talk to you about your enthusiasm that came back to. Let's talk about that mental state. So much so now, you have started sharing others' journeys by interviewing them, and also
Yeah.
more importantly, you have got the great privilege of starting a series with Sally herself about oxalates. Tell us
Yeah.
about it. Tell us
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Well, once I heard Sally's first video, then it was like kept searching YouTube for every freaking video that she had.
Me
And they
too.
mostly were the same, but then there would always be one nugget in each video that you didn't hear in the other ones. So that just inspired me to keep listening to them. And then at some point along the way, I was like, well, I want to start doing some of these interviews, and I would love to interview Sally. But then whenever I kind of got close to thinking I could do it, there'd be a little dropout in how I was doing, and I'd hit a rough spot, and I just couldn't pull it together. And then finally, and then I had the idea, it's like there's all these great interviews with Sally, but they're a lot of them are, they're kind of the same, like I was saying. And then I thought, with so many of us getting the information out there, wouldn't it be nice if people could go, especially if you might be a practitioner or you're trying to share a specific piece of information, like say you wanted to get more information on, say, oxalate's connection to endometriosis, or something like that. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a bunch of interviews with Sally, and maybe they weren't so long, and maybe they were more specific. So if people wanted to, you know, hear a specific aspect, they could go find that. So I threw that out to Sally as an idea, and she said, yeah, let's give it a try. So far, I've interviewed her 3 times. First one was a basic intro. Second one was, uh, yeah, no, I'm forgetting one. Oh, yeah, second one is what are oxalates? And then third one is what are the symptoms? And of course, they're not 15 minutes long. They're like 40 minutes or 50 minutes. And the last one, what are the symptoms? Oh, we really dove in deep, and that was an hour and a half. But I'm getting good feedback on them. People are digging them, that we're getting a little more deeper into the information. So, and I feel really privileged that Sally's willing to keep doing them with me. So this coming Wednesday, it's going to be it's basic stuff that's easy to find, especially with her book. But I figure some people are going to like being able to just hear it, and so it's the oxalate food list. So,
Yes.
well, yeah, and then I think once we get another one or two of the kind of basic ones, I'll pick Sally's brain, and but we might get topic specific, like let's get into like oxalates and osteoporosis, or let's get into oxalates and endometriosis, or you know other topics like that. So we'll see. I pray Sally likes to will want to keep working with me on this, but she's so busy. We'll just see what happens.
Well, I also know you've interviewed a bunch of other folks too and shared their healing stories, including myself. Folks, just if you're tuning in, Michael's YouTube channel is Michael Mathieu Vibrant Health. As I mentioned, we'll ask him for all the details at the end and where else we can find him. Michael, as we sort of get down to the last few minutes, I always ask my guests a few fun questions because, man, you've shared so much today, and I'm so grateful for you, brother. I really am. Now that you are carnivore, or mostly carnivore, what is your favorite meal to have? What is your favorite cut of meat that you enjoy eating the most?
Yeah, I think I'm boring that way.
No nonsense. Meat isn't boring.
No, I mean, a grilled ribeye
Oh yeah.
just pretty much does it for me.
Oh,
Although I
you.
will I will say, I watch, it's for someone who's so limited with their diet, I have a couple food shows that I really dig, and
Mhm.
I watch Chef's Table and Best Ever Food Review Show, and I like these travel food shows. But I keep getting barbecue put in my face. So I actually, the last 3 nights, Beth and I have dived into um, from Snow's Barbecue in Lexington, Texas. Brisket and ribs and sausage, all smoked barbecued, and
Good stuff.
yeah, really good stuff. So that's a special treat we'll do like once a year or something.
I was going to ask you as well, Michael, if you had to pick a movie that was your favorite over the years, what do you enjoy? What are your type of stuff do you like to watch when you watch? Is it more documentary style or actually fiction?
No, probably mostly. I mean, I like some of that stuff, but what's the name of it? It's I blame it on whenever anything happens, like my memory isn't good. It's like
Oxalate Brain.
goddamn oxalates.
I agree with you.
Love Actually.
Oh,
That's one
great
of my
one.
favorite movies of all time.
Great one.
Do you know that movie?
I sure do,
Oh my
sir.
god,
I sure do.
there's some funny characters in that movie. I just
And
Yeah, and I pretty much laugh and cry through the whole thing.
we cannot answer this question with toxic superfoods, but favorite book.
Um, Ender's Game is high up there.
Yes, great,
Yeah,
great one.
yeah, yep.
Great one. Michael, this has been absolutely a wonderful time to share with you. Thank you for taking the time out. I know what it means for you to get up early and go on this Bermuda time where time zones apart and take the time out to set up this, all your stuff. So thank you, brother. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can folks find you online? How can they get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you?
Sure. So, as James has already said a couple times, my YouTube channel is Michael Mathieu, Vibrant Health, and then on YouTube or on Instagram, Carnivore Quad, QUAD. And then my website is my name, Michael Mathieu, but the last name is spelled the French way, Mathieu. And I'll give just a little quick plug for myself if people are into stuff that's a little bit out of the box. Is I've been a body worker doing, as we talked about, for 30 years. What I didn't talk about is since my injury, I figured out how to do my work energetically and long distance. So if you're curious, take a look at my website. I've got some good testimonials and I talk about the work. So I meet up with people over Zoom and I'm still finding I'm getting really good results, which
Amazing.
is like crazy. When it happens, it's like, oh, I just fixed someone's frozen shoulder in London. It's like, how did I do that? But it works. Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, Michael, you are an inspiration to so many. We thank you for sharing your story. We thank you for everything that you're doing. I really want to say thank you again for taking the time out, and I wish you and Beth the very best always, my friend. And keep going. Keep going. I sense big things healing for you. Keep on this way. Keep sharing your story. And low ox warriors. Here we go.
Yeah, buddy. And thank you so much. I love what you're doing. I'm digging your content. You're doing some great work out there.
So thank you, sir. Best to you and Beth, and have a great rest of your day. And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to the good folks at Carnivore Bar and Equip Foods. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. And also, don't forget you can book me for a 30-minute carnivore coaching session through Avero Health. Again, the link will be in the show notes. Until the next time, be well.